When totalitarians take power, they seize the organs of information and opinion: newspapers, radio, television, and film. The Soviets were no different. The Bolshevik Revolution and subsequent civil war destroyed the nascent Russian film industry. In 1922, the year the Soviet Union was declared, there was only one movie house left in Moscow. By the next year, the Soviets had opened 89. Film was important to the Communists because of its power to inform and manipulate emotions on a large scale. Movies were silent then, no sound, and in black and white, but very powerful to a largely peasant, illiterate population. Movies were such a novelty that people gladly watched any entertainment put in front of them as a diversion from their miserable lives. Almost immediately, though, movie makers had to conform to the state's strict censorship guidelines. Movie makers were ordered to agitate and propagandize, to glorify the Soviet state and demonize its opponents. Sergei Eisenstein was a pioneer director and film theorist, considered to be the father of the editing technique known as montage, as well as other structural filmmaking techniques in camera angles, crowd movements, and general story exposition. In just a moment, we will examine three of his most famous works: Battleship Potemkin, October, and Alexander Nevsky. Eisenstein was born in 1898 in today's Latvia to a middle-class family. He was not of pure Russian stock, which brought him under suspicion in later Stalinist Russia. Eisenstein was a volunteer in the Bolshevik Revolution. After the war, he established the world's first film school in Moscow in 1919. Afterward, he gravitated to the theater, producing and directing plays. And as a postscript, by the way, guys, if you are an aspiring filmmaker, directing theater, especially directing one-act plays, is really an optimal way to learn to be a film director, because then you're focusing on the plot, the dialogue, the relationship among the actors, and not worrying about time on sets and on location shooting and all the rest. Anyway, back to Eisenstein. In 1923, he wrote a seminal article on the editing technique now known as montage. In 1925, the Soviet government asked Eisenstein to make a film commemorating the abortive 1905 revolution. Battleship Potemkin was only his second full-length film. 2 years later, he produced a dramatized version of the Revolution of 1917 called October. In 1930, Eisenstein accepted an offer from Paramount Pictures to come to Hollywood. In 2 years, he worked on 2 projects that were never completed. Then he went down to Mexico for another uncompleted project. By now, enjoying the sun and the freedoms of the West, he was getting pressure from an increasingly agitated Stalin to return. The dictator had a problem and needed Eisenstein's help. Stalin's paranoia had led him to decimate the army's officer corps, and meanwhile Hitler's Nazi regime was a threat to the West. So Stalin wanted Eisenstein to create a film that would summon the legends of old Russia and inspire his people, and that will be the subject of our third film, Alexander Nevsky. Now let's take a more detailed look at our movie trilogy. Battleship Potemkin is one of the world's most awarded films. It is a revolutionary propaganda film set in 1905, the year of the abortive rebellion. It is 73 minutes long, and you have plenty of time to watch it. The film is set in 5 acts. The first 3 acts concern a rebellion by sailors on the battleship Potemkin over rotten food and abusive treatment by the officers. The officers are killed by the mutineers, but the leader of the rebellion is killed too, and his body is brought into the Russian port of Odessa for burial. The townspeople gather to honor him, but are met by the armed police. Part 4, The Odessa Steps, is one of the most famous scenes in the history of movies. It starts about 47 minutes into the film. Watch it several times. Note carefully the film techniques the director uses: rapid editing, cross-cutting, stereotypical characters, the symbolism, the tension of the loose baby carriage. Eisenstein uses editing to stir up emotions and anxiety. What will happen to the baby in the carriage? Scene 5 is almost an afterthought, but important for its propaganda impact. The army and the rebelling sailors joined forces against the Tsar's troops and police. The massacre on the steps took place only in the movies, never in reality. The scene on the steps has been paid tribute in many movies, including The Untouchables, and even in comedies like Naked Gun 33 1/3. Our next film is October. To commemorate the 10th anniversary of the Bolshevik Revolution, the Soviet government had Eisenstein make a dramatization of the actual climactic 10-day period. From the time of the new provisional government in February 1917, there was violence and agitation among contesting parties, and the first half hour of this movie gives this historical background. By October, the Bolsheviks had the upper hand and stormed the Tsar's old palace, arresting and killing many of the provisional government leaders. The actual storming of the palace took place at night and was never photographed, but Eisenstein's work was so realistic that, just like the massacre on the Odessa steps, people take the movie for actual fact. When you watch the film, notice the editing of shots. Sometimes there is no logic to the sequence, but you are drawn into the picture nevertheless. This is a further development of his montage styling. The film did not receive the international acclaim that Potemkin had, and Eisenstein had to cut out a character that looked like Stalin's rival Trotsky, but overall it is a sweeping historical epic. Slides 12, 13, and 14 have no audio. See you on slide 15. The last of our three films is Alexander Nevsky, another historical epic. In the 1930s, the Russian people suffered under forced collectivization, purge trials, and the decimation of the Army's officer corps, under Stalin's increasingly paranoid terror. And at the same time, Nazi Germany was arming and threatening to their west. The plot is a thinly disguised allegory of the historical suspicion between German and Russian. Look carefully at all the symbolism, the helmets, the uniform markings, anti-religious markings, just as in October. The heroes of the movie were the common people, led by their local Prince Alexander, and not the upper classes. This was the first of Eisenstein's movies to be scored, and it was written by Prokofiev. One of the most famous scenes in moviedom is the battle on the ice, with Prokofiev's haunting, then triumphal, music underneath. The structure of the battle on the ice is replayed and given tribute in so many movies. You've seen it perhaps without realizing it, in The Empire Strikes Back, and we will see it again later when we watch Henry V. Montage is a technique of editing, which sacrifices strict chronological narration in favor of intercutting of scenes to create maximum psychological impact. Montage allows for changing the pace of storytelling, brings in simultaneous images and storylines, and generates an overall state of mind that envelops the viewers. The next time you catch the movie The Godfather, pay attention to the end, when Michael is dispatching his enemies. The rapid cross-cutting between the baptism scene and the individual rub-outs of the gangsters is a perfect example of montage, and director Francis Ford Coppola was consciously using that style.